The sound of her ragged breathing filled the night air as Olivia Chapman stumbled through the desert scrubland, each step a testament to her desperation. Blood seeped from her bare feet, leaving a trail across the harsh New Mexico Territory landscape, but she wouldn't stop even as the sharp rocks and cacti spines tore at her flesh. Behind her lay Grayson Springs, a town that had promised sanctuary but delivered only cruelty. Ahead lay uncertainty, but at least it offered the chance of freedom. It was 1875, and Olivia had learned the hard way that a woman alone had few allies in this unforgiving frontier. The moon hung high and bright, casting everything in silver light as she pushed forward, her tattered dress catching on scrub brush. She'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a small bundle containing her mother's locket, and the few dollars she'd managed to hide away during her 3 months of servitude at Madame Rosalie's establishment. "Never again," she whispered to the desert wind as she pressed onward, wincing as another sharp stone cut into her soul. "I'd rather die out here than spend another night in that place." 20 miles away, Lucas Xavier sat by his campfire, his weathered hands turning the pages of a dog-eared copy of the Iliad. At 28, Lucas was considered something of an oddity among the cowboys who worked the high desert ranches. A man who could break the wildest bronco by day and read Greek classics by night drew curious glances from his fellow ranch hands. But tonight, he was alone with his thoughts, having tracked a small herd of strays into this remote section of rangeland. His horse, Samson, nickered softly from where he was hobbled nearby, causing Lucas to look up from his reading. The animal's ears were pricked forward, alert to something beyond the circle of firelight. "What is it, boy?" Lucas set his book aside and reached for his Winchester. The desert night was full of dangers. Coyotes, rustlers, and rogue Apache bands still haunted these territories. He stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow as he scanned the darkness beyond his camp. Dawn broke over the desert with cruel swiftness, the temperature rising as the sun climbed. Olivia had collapsed behind a large boulder, her strength finally giving out as the night waned. She woke to the merciless heat already bearing down, her lips cracked and bleeding, her feet swollen and lacerated. She'd traveled perhaps 10 miles from Grayson Springs, but it might as well have been 10 feet for all the good it would do her if she couldn't find water soon. She forced herself to stand, using the boulder for support. In the harsh light of day, the full extent of her predicament became clear. Desert stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional rocky outcrop or stubborn mesquite tree. But in the distance, she thought she could make out a thin line of green, perhaps a creek bed or small river. "Just make it to the water," she told herself, her voice a rasping whisper. "Just make it that far." Lucas had risen with the first light, packed his small camp, and continued his search for the strays. As an experienced tracker, he easily spotted the signs of cattle passing through broken twigs, trampled grass, and occasional hoof prints in the sandy soil. But as he guided Samson around a rocky outcropping, he noticed something unexpected: human footprints. Dismounting, he crouched to examine them more closely. The prints were small, a woman's or perhaps a child's, and they were fresh, made sometime during the night. Most strikingly, they were barefoot, each impression showing the clear outline of toes and arch, often smeared with what Lucas recognized immediately as blood. "What in God's name?" he muttered, straightening up and scanning the horizon. Who would be wandering barefoot through this wasteland? And why? The tracks led away from the direction of Grayson Springs, a town Lucas avoided whenever possible. Its reputation for lawlessness and vice had grown in recent years, particularly after the silver mine opened and brought an influx of rough men with money to spend and few moral compunctions. Making a quick decision, Lucas swung back onto Samson. The strays could wait. Whoever had made these tracks was in desperate trouble, and Lucas Xavier was not a man who could turn his back on someone in need. He followed the bloody trail for nearly an hour, the tracks becoming more erratic as they progressed, suggesting their maker was stumbling, perhaps losing consciousness periodically. Finally, he spotted a figure in the distance, a small form moving with painful slowness toward the faint line of green that marked Cottonwood Creek. Olivia heard the horse before she saw it, the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the hard desert floor. Terror gripped her heart. Had they sent someone after her? Was it William Thorne, the man who'd purchased her contract from Madame Rosalie and claimed ownership of her body and soul? Or perhaps one of his men? She tried to move faster, but her battered feet would barely support her weight now. The sound grew louder, and with a final desperate surge, she ducked behind a large clump of sage brush, making herself as small as possible. The horse slowed, then stopped entirely. She heard the creak of leather as its rider dismounted. "Hello." A man's voice called, deep and resonant but lacking the cruel edge she'd come to expect from men in Grayson Springs. "I know you're there. I've been following your tracks." Olivia remained silent, heart hammering in her chest. "I'm not here to harm you," the voice continued. "My name is Lucas Xavier. I work at the Triple R Ranch about 15 miles east of here. I can see you're hurt. Let me help you." Still, Olivia said nothing, too frightened and too conditioned by recent experience to trust any man's words of kindness. She heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, and then he was there, standing a respectful distance from her hiding place. Through the sage branches, she could see him tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt. His face was tanned from long days under the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the distance. He wore simple ranch clothes, dusty from the trail, and a gun belt with a revolver holstered at his hip. "Madam," he said softly, those keen eyes finding her among the sage, "you need water and medical attention. Your tracks show you've been walking barefoot for miles. You'll die out here without help." Olivia remained frozen, weighing her limited options. She could try to run, but she knew she wouldn't get far. She could fight, but she had no weapon and little strength left. Or she could trust this stranger, this Lucas Xavier, and hope that his offer of aid wasn't a prelude to something more sinister. In the end, her body made the decision for her. As she tried to stand, a wave of dizziness overtook her, and she collapsed forward into the dust. When Olivia regained consciousness, she was lying in the shade of a small grove of cottonwood trees. A canteen rested against her lips, and cool water trickled into her parched mouth. She gulped greedily until gentle hands pulled the container away. "Easy," Lucas cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." Her vision cleared, and she found herself looking directly into Lucas's face. Up close, his eyes were a striking shade of green, clear and direct as they assessed her condition. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. He nodded once, then sat back on his heels. "Your feet need tending. I've got some supplies in my saddlebags." "It'll sting, but infection out here is a death sentence." Olivia tried to sit up, acutely aware of her vulnerability. "Why are you helping me?" Lucas stood and walked to his horse, returning with a small kit. "Because you needed help," he said simply, as if the answer were obvious. He knelt again and gestured toward her feet. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Olivia nodded. His hands were surprisingly gentle for a cowboy, cleaning each cut with water and whiskey from his flask, removing embedded thorns with a pair of tweezers, then spreading a salve over the worst wounds before wrapping them in clean strips of cloth. "You're running from something," he said as he worked, not a question but a statement of fact. "Someone," Olivia corrected, then bit her lip. She hadn't meant to reveal even that much. Lucas looked up from his task, those green eyes searching her face. "Grayson Springs," she nodded slightly. "Bad place," he said, returning his attention to her feet. "Getting worse every year." "It's a den of wolves," Olivia agreed bitterly. "And I was the lamb." Lucas finished with her feet and sat beside her, offering the canteen again. "I've got some jerky and hardtack in my bags. Not much of a meal, but it'll give you strength." As Olivia ate the simple provisions, she studied her rescuer more carefully. He didn't press her for details about her escape or her situation in Grayson Springs, which she found both surprising and relieving. Most men she'd encountered would have demanded her story or worse, demanded other things from a woman alone and vulnerable. "What will you do now?" Lucas asked after she'd eaten her fill. Olivia looked away across the creek to the vast expanse beyond. "I don't know," she admitted. I have a cousin in Santa Fe, but it's more than 100 miles from here. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, considering. The Triple R isn't far. The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, is a good woman. She might have worked for you, at least until you're healed and can make decisions with a clearer head. Olivia tensed. I won't work in a bunkhouse. Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes, and his expression hardened momentarily before softening again. Nothing like that. Mrs. Rodriguez runs a respectable operation. She needs help with cooking and keeping the books. Her eyesight isn't what it used to be. Hope fluttered in Olivia's chest, a dangerous feeling she'd thought long extinguished. Why would she take in a stranger? She took me in when I was little more than a boy with an attitude and something to prove, Lucas replied with a slight smile. Rosa Rodriguez has a soft spot for strays, human or animal. By mid-afternoon, they were riding toward the Triple R, Olivia seated behind Lucas on Samson's broad back. Her arms circled his waist somewhat reluctantly at first, but as the horse navigated the uneven terrain, she found herself holding tighter, her cheek occasionally resting against his solid back. The Triple R ranch came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a sprawling adobe main house. Several outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, grazing cattle dotting the landscape. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Rosa Rodriguez was in her early 60s, her once black hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with years of harsh sun and harsh realities. But her eyes were kind and her smile genuine as Lucas helped Olivia dismount. Lucas Xavier, I send you to find missing cattle and you bring back a young woman instead, Rosa observed, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Mexican heritage. This is becoming a habit with you. Lucas ducked his head, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Miss Olivia Chapman. She needs safe haven for a while. Rosa's shrewd eyes took in Olivia's tattered dress, bandaged feet, and the wariness that radiated from her thin frame. Without a word, she stepped forward and took Olivia's hand. Come inside, child, she said gently. Whatever demons chase you, they cannot cross my threshold. That night, clean and dressed in borrowed clothes, her feet properly treated by Rosa's practiced hands, Olivia sat at the kitchen table of the main house, a bowl of hearty stew before her. Rosa had asked no questions beyond her name, treating Olivia's wounds both visible and invisible with quiet efficiency. Lucas joined them for dinner, freshly washed and changed, his hair still damp from bathing. Olivia found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, studying the way his hands moved, confident and sure, the way his smile transformed his face when Rosa teased him about some ranch business. Lucas tells me you might need work, Rosa said as they finished their meal. As it happens, I do need help with the accounts and correspondence. My eyes aren't what they were, and my arthritis makes writing painful sometimes. I was educated in Boston before my parents died, Olivia offered. I can read, write, and keep books. I worked briefly as a teacher before. She trailed off, unwilling to speak of how she'd ended up in Grayson Springs. Rosa nodded. Then it's settled. You'll stay in the small room off the kitchen. It's modest but private. I can't accept charity, Olivia protested. I'll work for my keep. And so you shall, Rosa assured her. But tonight you rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to begin. Later, alone in the small but clean room with its narrow bed and simple furnishings, Olivia allowed herself a moment of quiet weeping. Not tears of sorrow or fear this time, but of relief of the sudden release of tension after months of constant terror and degradation. A soft knock at her door startled her. She quickly wiped her eyes. Yes, it's Lucas, came the reply. May I speak with you a moment? Olivia opened the door a few inches, suddenly conscious of her borrowed nightgown and loose hair. Lucas stood in the hallway, respectfully keeping his distance. I wanted to make sure you had everything you need, he said, his eyes carefully staying on her face. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez has been very kind. Lucas shifted his weight, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I also wanted to tell you that I'll be riding to town tomorrow, not Grayson Springs, but Cimarron. It's farther but safer, if there's anything you need. Olivia hesitated, then opened the door a bit wider. Actually, there is something. I'd like to send a letter to my cousin in Santa Fe to let her know I'm safe, and perhaps some shoes." Lucas smiled, the expression warming his features. "Consider it done. Good night, Miss Chapman." "Good night, Mr. Xavier, and thank you for following my tracks." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to Olivia's life. During the days, she worked in Rosa's study, organizing the ranch accounts, writing correspondence, and bringing order to the business side of the operation. Her bandaged feet healed slowly, and gradually she began to venture outside, first just to sit on the porch in the evening air, then to walk short distances around the yard. Lucas came and went, his duties as foreman keeping him busy from dawn till dusk, but he always made time to check on her progress, sometimes bringing small gifts, a wildflower, a pretty stone, or once, a book of poetry he'd picked up in Cimarron. "I noticed you eyeing my copy of the Iliad," he explained when he presented her with Tennyson's collected works. "Thought you might enjoy something a bit less bloody." It was these small kindnesses, offered without expectation, that began to chip away at the walls Olivia had built around her heart. She found herself looking forward to his visits, to their conversations that ranged from literature to philosophy to the simple daily happenings on the ranch. Rosa watched their growing friendship with knowing eyes but said nothing, though Olivia sometimes caught the older woman hiding a smile when Lucas stammered slightly in Olivia's presence, or when Olivia's cheeks colored at his compliments. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Lucas found Olivia sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Her feet, now healed enough for short walks, were tucked beneath her skirt. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, settling into the chair beside her. "It's strange," Olivia replied, her eyes on the horizon. "When I was running through this desert, it seemed so hostile, so threatening. Now I see its beauty." "The desert doesn't change," Lucas observed, "only our perception of it." They sat in companionable silence as the colors deepened, then faded into twilight. Stars began to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. "I received a letter from my cousin today," Olivia said finally. "She's invited me to come to Santa Fe whenever I'm ready." Lucas's hands tightened imperceptibly on the arms of his chair. "Will you go?" Olivia turned to look at him, studying the strong profile silhouetted against the last light. "I don't know. A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, he prompted when she didn't continue. "Now I'm not so certain what I want." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and something shifted between them, something unspoken but profound. The moment was broken by Rosa calling them in to dinner, but its effects lingered, creating a new awareness that hummed between them like a plucked guitar string. That night, Olivia lay awake long after the household had quieted, her thoughts circling around Lucas Xavier, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She'd sworn never to trust a man again, yet here she was, finding herself drawn to one with an intensity that frightened her. The next day brought an unwelcome disruption to the peace of the Triple R. Olivia was working in the study when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Moving to the window, she felt her blood freeze in her veins. 3 riders were approaching the main house, and even at a distance, she recognized the center figure's distinctive bow-legged gait and wide-brimmed black hat. William Thorne. She backed away from the window, panic rising in her throat. How had he found her? What would he do to those who had sheltered her? Rosa entered the study, her expression grave. "There are men approaching. You recognize them." Olivia nodded, unable to speak through her fear. "Go to the root cellar," Rosa instructed calmly. "There's a hidden space behind the potato bins. Lucas showed it to you?" "Yes, but no arguments. Go now, quickly." Olivia hurried to the kitchen and through the trapdoor that led to the cool darkness of the root cellar. Behind a large shelf of preserved vegetables and dried goods was a narrow space, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. Lucas had shown it to her weeks ago, explaining that it had once been used to hide runaway slaves during the years before the war. She squeezed into the tight space, pulling the shelf partially closed behind her, and waited, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. Above, she could hear muffled voices, Rosa's calm tones, then a man's harsher ones. Footsteps moved across the floorboards, searching. Twice, the trapdoor to the cellar opened, and heavy boots descended the steps. Olivia held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the hidden alcove as the intruder moved among the shelves, occasionally knocking items aside in his search. Finally, the footsteps retreated and the cellar door closed. More muffled conversation followed, then the sound of horses departing. Still, Olivia remained hidden, too terrified to emerge until she heard Rosa's voice calling her name. "They've gone," Rosa said as Olivia climbed shakily from the cellar. "But they'll be back. That one Thorne, he's not a man who gives up easily." "I should leave," Olivia said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm putting you all in danger." Rosa's weathered hand came to rest on Olivia's shoulder. "Running is sometimes necessary, but it's no way to live your life, child. Sooner or later, you must stand and face what pursues you." "You don't understand what he's capable of," Olivia whispered. "What he did to me, what he'll do to anyone who helps me." "I understand more than you might think," Rosa replied, her eyes darkening with old memories. "I was not always the respectable ranch owner you see now. We all have pasts, Olivia. The question is whether we let them define our futures." Lucas returned from the north pasture late that afternoon, his expression thunderous when Rosa told him about Thorne's visit. "You should have sent someone for me," he said, pacing the kitchen like a caged mountain lion. "And what would you have done?" Rosa challenged. "Shot them in my front yard." "Started a blood feud? No, Lucas. There are better ways to handle men like Thorne." "What did he want?" Lucas demanded, turning to Olivia. She sank into a kitchen chair, exhaustion washing over her. "Me. He paid Madame Rosalie for a 6-month contract. When I ran away, I took money that he considered his property just as he considered me his property." Lucas's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "No one owns another person, not anymore. In Grayson Springs, the law is whatever William Thorne says it is," Olivia replied bitterly. "He owns the silver mine, the saloon, and half the businesses in town. The sheriff is his cousin." "Then we need a different kind of law," Rosa interjected. "Lucas, ride to Cimarron tomorrow. Judge Parker will be holding court there this week. He has no love for Thorne or his kind." "And what do I tell the judge?" Lucas asked. "That Thorne is looking for a runaway woman. That's hardly illegal, especially if he claims she took his money." Olivia straightened in her chair. "Tell him that William Thorne is running a brothel with women held against their will. Tell him about Madame Rosalie's, where girls as young as 14 are kept drugged and compliant for the minor's pleasure. Tell him about Mary Sullivan, who tried to run and was beaten to death as an example to the rest of us." Her voice had grown stronger with each word, her fear giving way to a righteous anger that surprised even her. Lucas and Rosa stared at her, then at each other. "That should get the judge's attention," Rosa said quietly. That night, Lucas insisted on standing guard. He sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of approaching riders. Olivia brought him coffee and sat beside him, wrapped in a shawl against the night's chill. "You should rest," he told her, though his eyes said he was glad for her company. "I've rested enough," she replied. "Besides, I couldn't sleep knowing you're out here alone." They sat in silence for a time, the only sounds the distant howl of coyotes and the soft nickering of horses in the corral. "When I first saw your tracks," Lucas said suddenly, "I thought you might be a lost child. The footprints were so small and I couldn't imagine a woman walking barefoot through that terrain." "I couldn't imagine it either," Olivia admitted, "but fear is a powerful motivator." Lucas turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "What happened in Grayson Springs, Olivia? How did you end up there?" She had avoided telling the full story, sharing only fragments with Rosa and Lucas over the weeks. But now, in the quiet darkness with only the stars as witnesses, she found herself needing to unburden herself completely. "My parents died of influenza when I was 19, she began. "My father was a professor at a small college in Massachusetts, but he had little saved. I took a position teaching in a frontier school in Colorado, but when the town lost its mining operations, the school closed. I saw an advertisement for a teaching position in Grayson Springs, good wages, respectable lodging included." She paused, remembering her naive excitement as she traveled west. When I arrived, there was no school, no teaching position. Madame Rosalie met me at the stage, saying there had been a misunderstanding but offering me lodging until I could arrange other employment. I was drugged that first night laudanum in my tea when I woke. Her voice faltered and Lucas's hand found hers in the darkness, strong and warm. You don't have to continue, he said softly. No, I want to, Olivia insisted. I need someone to know the truth. She took a deep breath and continued, her voice steady despite the painful memories. When I woke, I was told I owed Madame Rosalie for my passage to Grayson Springs, for my room and board, for the clothes she provided. The debt was substantial, and the only way to work it off was to entertain the miners and cowboys who frequented her establishment. Lucas's hand tightened around hers, but he remained silent, allowing her to speak without interruption. I refused at first. I was beaten and starved until I complied. After a few months, William Thorne began to take a special interest in me. He paid Madame Rosalie a premium for exclusive rights to my company. That's when things became truly unbearable. Thorne is a cruel man who takes pleasure in others' pain. She fell silent, the memories too dark to voice aloud. Lucas seemed to understand, for he didn't press her to continue. How did you escape? He asked instead. Thorne was called away, unexpectedly trouble at one of his mines. The guard who was supposed to watch my door drank himself into a stupor. I climbed out the window, but there was no time to find shoes or gather provisions. I just ran as fast and as far as I could into the desert night. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and fierce. I won't let him take you back, Olivia, I swear it. She looked up at him, at the determination etched on his face, and something inside her, something that had been broken for a very long time, began to heal. I believe you, she whispered, and realized it was true. Against all odds and contrary to bitter experience, she trusted this man, trusted him with her safety, her story, and perhaps someday her heart. Dawn found them still on the porch, talking softly as the eastern sky lightened. They'd shared more than words during the long night vigil. They'd shared dreams and fears, hopes and regrets. Olivia had told Lucas about her childhood in Boston, her love of literature and learning. He'd spoken of his own, past his father's death in the war, his mother's remarriage to a brutal man, his flight west at 16 to make his own way in the world. As the first rays of sunlight touched the distant mountains, Lucas reluctantly rose. I need to ride for Cimarron if I'm to reach the judge today. Will you be all right here with Rosa? We'll be fine, Olivia assured him. Rosa keeps a shotgun behind the kitchen door and she seems quite capable of using it. Lucas smiled, then grew serious again. Olivia, when this is over, when you're truly free of Thorne and his threats, I hope you'll consider staying, not out of necessity or fear, but because you want to. The simple statement held worlds of meaning, and Olivia felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. I'll consider it, she promised. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer for now. As he turned to go prepare for his journey, Olivia called after him, Lucas. He looked back, eyebrows raised in question. Be careful. His smile was like the sunrise, breaking across his face with warmth and promise. Always. The day passed with agonizing slowness for Olivia. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept straying to Lucas riding toward Cimarron, to Thorne and his men who might be watching the ranch even now, to the uncertain future that awaited her regardless of the judge's response. Rosa, practical as always, kept her busy with tasks that required concentration, taking inventory of the pantry, helping to prepare preserves from the summer garden, even teaching her to make tortillas from scratch, a skill Rosa insisted every woman should possess. Your mind needs occupation, the older woman explained as she demonstrated how to pat the dough into perfect rounds. Otherwise, fear grows until it fills every corner. By evening, with still no word from Lucas, Olivia's nerves were stretched to breaking point. She jumped at every sound, peered anxiously out windows at the approach of dusk, and finally took up position on the porch, watching the trail that led toward Cimarron. Rosa joined her as the last light faded, bringing a shawl for each of them against the evening chill. He'll come when he can, she said, settling into her rocking chair. Lucas Xavier is not a man who breaks his promises. What if Thorne found him on the road, Olivia worried. What if the sky turns green tomorrow? Rosa interrupted. What if chickens start laying golden eggs? We could play this game until sunrise, child, and be no wiser for it. Olivia smiled despite her anxiety. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Rodriguez. I am an old woman who has seen much, Rosa corrected. Too much to waste time on what-ifs when there are real concerns enough. They sat together in companionable silence as the stars appeared, one by one, in the deepening blue of the sky. Rosa began to speak softly of her own past her marriage to a young rancher named Roberto, their struggle to build the Triple R from nothing, the drought years when they nearly lost everything, the bandits who had once threatened their home. Roberto died defending this land, she said, her voice tinged with old grief. He believed that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for. I have lived by that belief ever since. I'm sorry, Olivia said, reaching out to touch the older woman's hand. Rosa's fingers closed around hers. Don't be, we had 20 good years together, more happiness than many find in a lifetime, and I have continued his work, built something that will outlast us both. She paused, her dark eyes studying Olivia's face in the dimming light. You remind me of myself at your age, strong-willed, determined to make your own way despite what men might say is proper or possible. I don't feel very strong, Olivia confessed. Most days I feel like that frightened girl running barefoot into the desert, just one step ahead of disaster. Yet here you sit, Rosa pointed out, alive, free, planning your future rather than simply reacting to threats. That is strength, Olivia, never doubt it. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats not from the direction of Cimarron, but from the south, toward Grayson Springs. Both women tensed, and Rosa rose swiftly, disappearing into the house to return moments later with her shotgun. Inside, she commanded, but it was too late. 4 riders appeared in the yard, William Thorne in the lead. His face, visible in the light spilling from the house windows, wore an expression of triumphant malice. Miss Chapman, he called, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. I believe you and I have unfinished business. Olivia stood frozen on the porch, terror and fury warring within her. Rosa moved to stand beside her, shotgun raised. This is private property, Mr. Thorne, the older woman called back. You and your men are trespassing. Thorne's laugh was cold. A technicality. I've simply come to collect what's mine, a runaway servant who stole from me. No court would deny my right. She is not property, Rosa replied, her voice steel, and she is under my protection. Thorne dismounted, his movements languid, confident. His 3 companions remained on horseback, hands resting near their holstered weapons. Your protection, he mocked. An old woman with a shotgun against 4 armed men. Be sensible, Mrs. Rodriguez. Hand over the girl and we'll leave your ranch intact. Olivia felt a surge of resolve, born of weeks of safety and kindness at the Triple R, of Rosa's quiet strength and Lucas's steadfast support. She stepped forward. I won't go with you, William, she called, her voice surprisingly steady. Not now, not ever again. Thorne's face darkened with anger. You have no choice, Olivia, you signed a contract. Under duress and false pretenses, she countered. No legitimate court would uphold it. Perhaps, Thorne conceded with a shrug, but we're a long way from any legitimate court, aren't we? Out here, possession is what matters. He took another step forward. Come along now, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Rosa's shotgun didn't waver. Take one more step and I'll show you difficult. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the sound of more riders approaching, this time from the direction of Cimarron. Thorne and his men turned, hands moving to their weapons, as Lucas appeared at the head of a group of mounted men. Beside him rode a distinguished-looking gentleman in a black coat and a stern-faced man wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. Evening, Thorne, Lucas called, his voice deceptively casual as he reined in his horse. Seems you're a popular topic of conversation in Cimarron today. Thorne's confident demeanor faltered slightly. This is a private matter, Xavier. It doesn't concern you or your friends. The distinguished gentleman urged his horse forward. On the contrary, Mr. Thorne. When allegations of kidnapping, forced servitude, and murder reach my courtroom, they become very much my concern. I am Judge Isaac Parker, and I've issued warrants for your arrest and for the premises known as Madame Rosalie's establishment in Grayson Springs. Thorne's hand moved toward his gun, but the marshal was faster, his revolver already drawn and pointed. I wouldn't, he advised coldly. Judge Parker doesn't appreciate having to delay justice while wounded prisoners heal. For a tense moment, Olivia thought Thorne might risk it anyway, his face contorted with rage, his body coiled like a snake about to strike. But after a calculating glance at the odds against him, he slowly raised his hands. This isn't over, he said, his eyes finding Olivia's with a look of pure hatred. On the contrary, Mr. Thorne, Judge Parker replied, for you I believe things are just beginning. Marshal, if you please. The next hours passed in a blur for Olivia. Thorne and his men were disarmed and taken into custody. Judge Parker, a formidable presence despite his advanced years, took her statement regarding the conditions at Madame Rosalie's, the circumstances of her employment there, and the fate of Mary Sullivan. His questions were direct but not unkind, his manner that of a man who had heard many dark tales during his years on the bench but had never grown callous to human suffering. You've shown remarkable courage, Miss Chapman, he said when they had finished. Your testimony, along with that of 2 other women we located in Cimarron who had similar experiences, should be sufficient to close that establishment permanently and see that its proprietors face justice. And Thorne? Olivia asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Mr. Thorne will be facing multiple serious charges, the judge assured her. I've seen his kind before. Men who believe their wealth and influence place them above the law. They learn otherwise in my courtroom. The marshal and his deputies departed with their prisoners as dawn broke, heading for the territorial prison in Santa Fe, where Thorne and his associates would await trial. Judge Parker remained briefly, accepting Rosa's offer of breakfast before his return journey to Cimarron. You have friends in high places, it seems, the judge observed to Olivia as they sat at the kitchen table. Mr. Xavier was most persuasive regarding the urgency of this matter. Olivia glanced at Lucas, who was talking quietly with Rosa near the stove. He saved my life, she said simply. Judge Parker followed her gaze, a knowing look crossing his weathered features. I believe he may have saved more than that, my dear. After the judge's departure, an exhausted but relieved Olivia found herself alone with Lucas for the first time since his return. They stood on the porch, watching the dust settle on the trail where the judge's buggy had disappeared from view. Thank you, Olivia said softly, for everything. Lucas turned to face her, his eyes serious. I told you I wouldn't let him take you. You did more than keep your word. You brought justice, he shrugged, uncomfortable with her praise. Judge Parker did that. I just pointed him in the right direction. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. Finally, Lucas spoke again, his voice hesitant. Have you decided about staying? Olivia looked out across the ranch, the place that had become a sanctuary, then a home. She thought of Rosa's quiet strength, of the work that gave her purpose, of the peace she'd found here after so much turmoil. And she thought of Lucas Xavier, who had followed the tracks of a barefoot woman through the desert, not knowing who she was or what dangers he might face, simply because someone needed help. Yes, she said, turning back to him with a smile that held promise. I've decided to stay. Not out of necessity or fear, but because I want to. The relief and joy that bloomed on Lucas's face made her heart skip. He stepped closer, one hand reaching tentatively to touch her cheek. I'm glad, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Because I think I've been falling in love with you since I found your tracks in the desert. Olivia leaned into his touch, the last of her barriers crumbling before the simple truth of his words. And I've been trying very hard not to fall in love with you, she admitted. I was afraid to trust again, to hope again. And now I'm not afraid anymore. His kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand, and Olivia answered it with all the newfound courage in her heart. 1 year later, Olivia stood on the porch of the small cabin Lucas had built for them on the eastern edge of Triple R land. Summer was fading into autumn, the desert evenings growing cooler, the sunsets more vivid against the distant mountains. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, evidence of the new life that would join them come spring. She watched as Lucas rode in from checking the herd, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening sky. So much had changed in the year since Judge Parker's visit. Thorne and Madame Rosalie had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. 3 other women from the establishment had been freed, one of whom now worked as a cook at the Triple R. Rosa had legally transferred a portion of the ranch to Lucas and Olivia, ensuring that their future and that of their children would be secure. And Olivia had found her voice again, not just as Lucas's wife or Rosa's assistant, but as a teacher at the small school they'd established for the children of the ranch workers. Life on the frontier remained challenging, sometimes dangerous, but she faced it now with confidence rather than fear. Lucas dismounted and secured his horse, his face breaking into a smile when he saw her waiting. He crossed to the porch in long strides and gathered her into his arms, his kiss a homecoming. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" he asked, his hand joining hers over their unborn child. "We're perfect," Olivia assured him. "Especially now that you're home." As they stood together in the fading light, Olivia thought of the desperate woman who had fled barefoot into the desert night, leaving bloody tracks across the harsh landscape. That woman could never have imagined finding such happiness, such belonging, such love. Yet here she was, proof that even the darkest trails could lead to the brightest destinations if only one had the courage to follow them home.